Hello, everyone, and welcome to Project Insights Project Management webinar. Today's topic is managing multiple projects. So just a few things to know before we get started. All participants will be on mute. However, any questions you have are more than welcome. Please type them into the questions box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard. All of our PM webinars are valid for one PDU free of charge. However, you must be in attendance for the full session. PDU certificates will be sent out by the end of the day, so please hold off on emailing us about your certificate until then. And for those of you interested in the recording and slides, they'll be sent out by tomorrow via email. And of course, you can find them within our Project Insight community as well. My name is Alexa, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight, and if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to reach me at alexa.ortega-mendoza@projectinsight.com. And for those of you not familiar with us, Project Insight has been the leading project management software dedicated to helping teams work better together for over 15 years. And PI was named the best project management solution at this year's SIA Cody Awards for continuing to innovate the way teams work and communicate. And we have a software solution suitable for every size team, from our enterprise solution to PI Team, our free social project management software. We've got you covered. You can request a free demo of our enterprise platform or sign up for PI Team on our website. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about us, please feel free to contact us via phone or email. So we'd like to give a warm welcome to our host today, Diane Buckley. Diane is the CEO of Core Performance Concepts. CPC helps companies by training team members in project management, PMP preparation, leadership, and business analysis. Diane has an MBA and a PMP and more than 30 years experience in the PM industry. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass this over to Diane. Welcome.
Welcome, Alexa, and welcome everybody. So great to see a lot of you here on, for those that are in the U.S. on the day before our Thanksgiving holiday, and for those of you that are not in the U.S., welcome. And all of us here in the U.S. are getting ready to eat a whole lot of food tomorrow. All right. So do you want to send me the?
Yep. There you go.
There it goes. Okay. Whoops. All right. So welcome everybody. And today this is our follow-on session from 2 weeks ago when we were talking about managing multiple projects. And as many of you are aware and experienced, most organizations today do not have the luxury of individuals working on one project only. A lot of that comes from the changes in how we approach projects to be more iterative, the onset of, agile methodologies, we're looking at being able to deliver smaller components faster, getting more input, so it's natural progression that we're all dealing with multiple projects. And, there are challenges with that. There's a trade-off to that. You don't have that focus, and there's statistics out there that show that the more things you're working on, the less efficient you become. So there is a problem with this, and, organizations strive to deliver on strategy and to execute well so that they can grow and to expand and thrive. However, if you look at some of the statistics, only 9% of organizations consider themselves excellent at successfully executing on their strategy. When I first saw that stat, I was kind of surprised. I thought more companies would think that they were really good at it, but maybe we're less optimistic than I would have thought. So anyway, so 9% of organizations rate themselves as excellent, and that basically means that 56% of projects that are initiated within organizations are actually meeting the original goals and their intent, which means that 44% are not. So what does that mean? So we spent a little bit of time 2 weeks ago talking about that, some high-level ideas with regard to how we can impact that. And we're going to kind of go through those ideas again, go a little bit deeper, and also answer many of the questions you guys had from our session 2 weeks ago. So when you think about organizational goals and being met or not met, the thing that I like to use, the analogy I like to use to put it in perspective is consider yourself a small business. And small businesses are very resource constrained. You only have so much time in a day. You can only do so many things. And let's say you have 2 major initiatives for your small business. And one of them succeeds and the other one does not. Is your business going to be successful? Let's say you're a larger organization and you have 2 significant major strategic initiatives, and one doesn't achieve its goals and one does. Is that organization successful? So the importance of really measuring ourselves to those strategic objectives is critical in the success and the livelihood of organizations. And the fact that you are working on many projects, all aligning to some level of strategic effort, can you see where there can be a lot of confusion if everybody's working on 10 different projects? How do they fit? How do they align? Which ones do I work on first? Which ones are the most important? So without having dedicated resources and on initiatives and adding more iterations into the mix, the prioritization of these projects becomes very complex. So what ends up happening? Some organizations have really high-performing organizations. And when they do, 89% of their projects succeed. And when they don't, only 36% of their projects succeed. And there's a significantly more waste in those lower performing organizations. So think about it. You're working on 10 projects. You get a phone call today. You were working on project number 1. Been working on it for the last 3 hours. You get a phone call. It's on project number 8, which you haven't touched in about 3 days. So you pick up the phone. You want to be responsive. They ask for something specific. They really need it fairly quickly. You say, okay, well, I can work on it this afternoon. And you put down the phone. So what do? Do you finish what you were working before? Or do you immediately go and take care of the item that person was requesting? And the answer to that will depend. But we get so many interruptions today, whether it's Skype, whether it's text messaging, whether it's phone calls, whether it's email, whether it's your boss coming to your desk, or your child, if those of us that work at home, I don't have any children at home, but your child comes running up to you and wanting something. We get so many interruptions. How do we stay focused? And just that simple phone call that came in while you were working on that project number 1 has now wasted, and I'm going to call it waste, because your brain actually had to shut down what it was doing, start up a whole nother thought process on this other project number 8, and refresh your memory with regard to what happened 3 days ago, and be able to respond to the person that's on the phone, and then shut down the phone. So every one of those interruptions causes inefficiency in our beings. So when we have multiple projects and we're not dedicated resources and we're not doing these large projects where it's obviously you're focused on the big initiative, the management of all those projects becomes inefficient, because not all of us can manage projects, can manage multiple tasks well. So what we're going to talk about today are some tips, some tricks, some ways to think about it. It's not rocket science. There's no magic pill. But I want you to encourage to practice these yourself and then help others practice them. I find myself often talking to other project managers that are struggling with managing multiple projects, and I find myself telling them most frequently is when it's really important, you've got to block the time off. And I'll give you a real example, from just yesterday. I mean, this is a holiday week for us, so activity is low, right? I had one report that I really needed to review yesterday. I got all kinds of phone calls, all kinds of things showed up. I never got to the report. Fortunately, this morning, because it's quiet, I was able to sit down and kind of go through it and have a real thorough thought process around that report. And thinking takes time, guys. I read some statistics a couple months back that it said that within a 40-hour work week, how many hours do you think we are performing real thinking? Let's do that as a quick little question out, and you can throw your answer out on the chat. How many hours in a 40-hour work week do you think we, on the average, really do thinking? And I think this was 2012 stats, if I'm not mistaken. So let's see what you got here. Let's see how much thinking you think we're doing. All right, we got 25 hours, 20 hours, 25%, 30%. One person put 1. Well, and 4 to 6. Well, I'm gonna tell you the stats that I read said 5 hours out of a 40-hour week is real thinking time. So that begs the question, what am I doing all the rest of 35 hours? Well, some of it's, on the average, you got to take into account sick time, PTO, vacation time, etc. But let's say you've got a 35 hours on the average of real workable time, and 5 hours is thinking. What are we doing the other 30 hours? What do you think we're doing the other 30 hours? Go ahead and put your thoughts there in the question box. What do you think we're doing the other 30 hours? I'm scrolling down between all of your stuff here. I can't see. It's like taking me forever to scroll down. But I'm looking at some of the other answers. But what we're doing in those other 30 hours is reacting. You get an email, quick question, react. You get a Skype, quick question, you react. Somebody sends you a text, okay, I'm going to answer them. And if you think about that, and this kind of goes to this first bullet here, we're trying to do so much more with less. And we're not putting the right amount of time into what we need to do. And we're minimalizing what it really means to have good communication. And this company that I work with, they have a support team and everything else, and they constantly get support calls. And I was helping one of the analysts out over the last couple of weeks, and we got on the phone and we worked through a couple issues, and we followed the whole process, what we should be doing. Reviewing what the issue is, verifying that the client's issue is actually valid, determining how to fix it, making the fix, testing that fix, and then communicating back to that client what the actual outcome was. Now that is assuming that the support person and I could fix whatever the issue was. It doesn't require to go to an engineering group or some other department. That was just assumption. It took a good 30 minutes. And I guarantee you, when you talk to senior executives and stuff, they're like, well, why does it, you know, you should just be able to handle a support call in 5 minutes. No, to do it right, we have to take the right amount of time. And I think we all get stuck in that. We kind of get consumed with that. So my first recommendation for you is to don't react. Do less reaction, which kind of talks right to this first point of active listening. We're so used to having to give quick answers. You know, we got a text, we got a Skype, we got, you know, an email, give quick answers, you know, keep going, move on. You know, I'm being really, really efficient, but I may not be even effective. Am I giving the right answer? Am I making the person on the other end of that response frustrated? You know, so stop. Let's be in the moment. It doesn't mean that you have to take 4 hours. You know, maybe 40 minutes is appropriate and 5 minutes is not appropriate, but 40 hours is not appropriate either. You know, so you have to use the right amount of time, and you have to know when it's the right amount of time. So one of the things we can do to be more effective in our management of multiple projects is to slow down and give right responses. And I'm going to kind of kick into that. I just kind of kept going on my little rant here. But, you know, because we have to do more with less, we're going to go through 5 different things here today. We're going to talk about active listening. We're going to talk more about prioritizing your work and your time. We're going to talk about clearly communicating and how we manage those expectations. And then finally, talking a little bit about the tools that allow that visibility. So taking these 5 bullets, these 5 thoughts to heart will help you reduce the stress of managing multiple projects and make you more effective in managing multiple projects. So I was kind of going off on my whole active listening there, but I'll come back here. But, you know, it really talks about getting to know what the real situation is. Have you ever been on a conference call when somebody presents a problem and there's somebody on the call that is immediately responding and say, you need to do this? Probably. I know I have. But I question whether or not we actually heard the whole story, because a couple of reasons. People are not the best communicators in general. So what is being communicated as the problem may only be the symptom and not really the problem. So let's ask a few questions. Let's probe a little bit into the problem and make sure we're all on the same page with regard to what the problem is. And be clear with regard to what we're trying to accomplish. So it really does take us to listen, to pay attention, to not just jump to conclusions, to resist that immediate response that we're getting so used to doing. Alexa, any questions to this point?
At this point, nope.
Okie dokie. Well, I'll catch up with you, and just interrupt me if you see something good that comes up.
Sure thing.
Interrupt me if you see something bad that comes up too. So, so active listening is one of the key things. Slow down, pay attention, and be in the moment. When you actively listen, you're going to understand that problem a little better. So let's talk about priorities. Do you know what the priorities are within your organization? Do you know how your projects tie into those priorities? And do you know within your projects, which projects are critical to the organization and which projects have less criticality? To be able to work well in a multiple project environment, it's critical to have that knowledge. Who's the biggest client that you service? What's the new project that's going on that's going to bring the most value to the company? What I find, though, is most of the time, us, project managers and project teams, don't have that information. And I'm like, well, how else do you function without knowing that? Or at least some sense of how priority is determined at your executive level. If you don't know, ask. We cannot be effective in our delivery if we're not knowing what those priorities are. And then within your project, with your schedules, you identify a critical path, and we should be monitoring that critical path items very tightly. Because if I have a slippage of my critical path items, I'm potentially going, most likely going to impact the delivery date of my project. So do I have to spend my time worrying about the things that are not on the critical path? Not necessarily. I do need to pay attention to ones that are. Things that can impact my delivery, I need to know what they are, and I need to be monitoring them quickly. Things will change. Some other things might become critical path items later on, and then you're going to have to respond to that. But again, don't react. Know how it fits in. And if you've done your risk management planning well, and a critical item has shifted, you should have some way to approach that and know what's going to happen. I have a situation that's on one project that I'm working on right now, and it's a risk. We've got some quality assurance tasks. We have some user acceptance testing that's going to happen. The time frame is probably going to be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, and there's 5 different entities that are working together on it. And you're dealing with QA resources that aren't as familiar with the products as the actual users. And I've worked with many organizations that have those separate QA teams, and I can tell right now, based on initial conversations and planning for that this is going to be an area that I have to pay attention to. If I don't want my project to slip, and this one is a critical one for the organization, then I have to put together some sort of risk plan, to be able to ensure that it doesn't impact the delivery. So I'm starting to work on that. Again, I know what my priorities are. I know this project and delivering it on time is critical. It's a huge, high visibility within the organization. And I've got to do everything I can to ensure that it works. Now, I'm working on other projects. Have to, but I know I have to give the appropriate attention to this one. And I block off the time, and I make sure it happens. And like I said, don't be afraid to ask questions. This is where we too often just kind of react, and we too often just kind of say, oh, so-and-so told me to do this, and I'm going to do it because they told me. Why? I asked the question, why? Explain to me why that task needs to be done right now. Because I've got these 6 other things going on, and I need to make sure I'm prioritizing well. So if somebody is pushing you to deliver something, I'll give you another example. I had a call this morning. I know we have to get a finalized, signed off business requirements document. I anticipate that we'll have the last pieces detailed out in the next week because we've got some meetings scheduled. And I'd like to be able to put a bow around those business requirements documents by the end of next week. I know for a fact that these documents exist. I know for a fact that these documents have been updated. They're pretty accurate. I said, but do I just assume that everything is going to be ready next week, by the end of next week. No, I had a quick 15-minute phone call with the team that needs to make sure that it happens. We talked about how we're going to do it, what's missing, making sure that, and give them a target date. I said, I need this stuff done. Other than this one dependency, I need this updated and ready to go by the 1st of December. And I asked, like, is there anything stopping you from being able to support that? Is there any other projects that you've got? Because I have to be sensitive to their priorities too. And I want people to be able to tell me. And then if they tell me, well, I'm working on these 3 projects, how does your project fit into that? Going back to the first bullet, what are the priorities and do I know the priorities for the organization? Know and communicate why you are prioritizing one project over the other is just what I was saying, is ask questions, understand the organizational priorities, have those conversations with people to make sure you are not negatively impacting the organization by inserting your influence on others. Now, I'll tell you one other thing. You got friends in work, right? And if you have friends in work, sometimes they're more willing to help you out than not. And sometimes, even if you say, hey, you know what, can you do this for me? Can you get this done by Tuesday? They'll just say, yeah, I will. And because they like you and you're friends, they're going to do that. And what they'll end up doing is they'll bump something that shouldn't have been bumped. So I want you to have those conversations. Listen, to what's going on, have those conversations, and set the appropriate targets for the deliverables that you need. And then finally, as part of prioritization, you want to understand the cost of the decisions you make. Does anybody in this audience had somebody in another department change a process on you that added more work to your team? Has anybody ever had another department change a process on them that impacted your team negatively? So it all kind of goes to this active listening, prioritization. We all should be raising our hand because we have to be cognizant and sensitive to how decisions are made and the impact on others. So, and when you impact somebody and it's adding more work to their day, you're adding costs to the process. I have these conversations all the time. I had one yesterday. One of our business analysts, we were trying to implement a new process, and I refused to implement a process fully until we've kind of vetted it out. Yeah, we can talk about it in theory, but now we're in the process of we're kind of doing some beta testing with it and making sure it works for the various groups that have to follow it. And she started questioning, well, why are you doing it this way? And that seems to be more work to me. Why wouldn't we do it this way? And we can do it, and that can simplify it. And I had the opportunity to share with her the impact downstream to others that added cost to the process. So I appreciate the fact that she was asking me those questions. I'm not against communicating how that whole impact works. And she then understood why we were defining the process the way we were, because what I was asking her to do wasn't a huge issue one way or the other, but she just thought that, well, why can't we do it this way? And she didn't understand the downstream impact. And so when I explained that to her, she was like, oh, I get it. I'm good. So taking that little bit of time to explain that, and I know we sat on this slide for a long time, but it's important, a very important concept for us to understand, and prioritization and how we manage our day. And I always love this particular slide when I'm teaching classes, and people usually appreciate it too. you can sit here and look at this in the bottom left-hand corner. It says not important and not urgent. So everybody always gets that. Yeah, we shouldn't be working on things that are not important and not urgent. So you'd be surprised that we do sometimes. But make sure you're not. You don't want to be in that quadrant. And the bottom right-hand quadrant is not important and urgent. Well, you don't want to be in that one either, because that means we are putting time and energy, a lot of time and energy, on something that has very little return. So think about that. Are you putting a lot of energy on something that has very little return? I always have a lot of anecdotes and a lot of stories. I actually had this conversation a couple weeks ago. One of the executives wanted to reduce the hours it took to deliver a particular type of project. Small projects, really small projects, like 50 hours. He said, why does it take 50 hours to do this? This should be slam dunk, should be really easy. We should be able to get this down to 30 or 35 hours. And I'm like, I don't disagree that it would be nice to reduce it. However, those particular projects right now are profitable. The person running it is always on time. The clients she works with are always happy. I'm like, the return on investment would be maybe, $50,000, $100,000 annually. I said, I don't see the value. If you can put together an ROI that makes it a little bit more than $100,000, and I can see the effort in putting it, but we have other areas that we can work on where customers aren't happy and projects are not on time. So yeah, it may be urgent in your mind that we should reduce the prices of these, but I don't think it's that important. So having that conversation. Now in the top left-hand corner, the gray box, that's where you want to spend all your time. You want to be working on things that are important and not urgent. That means you are calmly, effectively, efficiently working through your projects, delivering on what you need to deliver, and getting the job done. Every once in a while, something may pop over into that top right-hand quadrant, important and urgent. Hopefully not that often, but inevitably something will. Projects are unique, projects are risky, we can't think of everything, we're not perfect. So every once in a while something might pop into that important and urgent. But if you're working primarily in the important and not urgent quadrant, to take a little bit of time out of a day or whatever to resolve an important and urgent issue is not a big deal. You won't feel stressed when you're doing that. So again, as a concept of managing multiple projects, you need to know what's important and what's not urgent. And when it does jump over into that important and urgent, you appropriately respond to it. Don't react. Here's our little squirrel, got a Skype. Oh my God, sky is falling. This was that whole thing with that small project. It's like all of a sudden I'm getting these Skypes saying, oh, we need to look at this and that and the other thing. I said, it's not important. So I took maybe half hour out of my day and I just responded back and I said, here's why it's not important. And if you disagree with that, we can have more of a conversation. But here's why it's not important, and I'm not putting any energy into it. And I just stopped that conversation. But when it is important and urgent, that's when we need to be spending our time on. So you can see where so often it is so easy for people to toss out, these ideas, these great ideas. Oh, let's try this, or this may be. Like, but it's not something you should be focused on. You got to stay on track for the things that you've committed to deliver on and with their relative importance to the organization. I'll take another little breather here. Any questions? Alexa?
No questions yet, but a lot of people have been
All right.
participating.
Good, good, good. Okay, excellent. So we've talked about active listening. We've talked about prioritization, and and all these things are important. I can't stress how important all of these things are, and you got to just have a mindset for constantly doing this. Clear communications. I pulled this from the Business Analysis Practitioner's Guide from PMI, which I think is awesome. Anybody that's a project manager or business analyst that's on this call, you should go get it and you should read through it. Now, it's not that you're going to be doing that stuff, but this is what you should be expecting from your team. But there is one component of it that is valid for everybody on the project. It's about, there's a section in there about writing requirements. And in there, it talks about how to make things clear. And I think this is a really great way to think about what we're doing on communication. Our communication is terrible in this world nowadays. Again, partly because we're getting so used to trying to say everything in 145 characters. It's a text message, it's a Skype, it's a quick email. It's like, sometimes and many times, effective communication requires more than just 145 characters. But what you want to strive for is your communication needs to be precise, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be complete, it needs to be measurable, and the term unambiguous, and I decided to put an example in here because sometimes people might say, well, what does that exactly that mean? So precise. I always tell people, since I've written a couple textbooks, I tell people, I'm a textbook writer. I am not a romance novelist, right? And there's a difference. So the way that I write, the way that I talk is like a textbook, clear, specific, not going to have a whole lot of color to it. I'll give a lot of examples, but I'm not the one that's going to be that romance novelist. And in business, I thoroughly believe that you have to be a textbook writer. And you have to work to make sure that your communication, whether it's written or oral or in a PowerPoint or in an email, it has to be very precise. What exactly are you trying to say? And I see too often we just type write really fast and our communication gets misinterpreted, or that communication gets perceived a different way. Instruction isn't clear, so I want you to practice making sure that you are thinking through your communication. Like I said earlier, it took 30 minutes plus to respond appropriately to that client. And here's the test of it. The client said that this is broken in the system, said this isn't working. And so the support gentleman and I looked at it, we did our research, we tested it. Bottom line, we looked at our documentation that was available, and bottom line, no, the system was acting the way it should have acted. The client was thinking about something that we had changed maybe a few months back and had forgotten that we had changed the workflow. So we took a few minutes and we detailed it out in an email and very specific and said, here's what we did, here's what we tested, here's the documentation that shows that it should have gone to where it did go. And the response back from the client was like, oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. Issue closed. How many times do you have emails going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it just sounds like there's a whole lot of confusion going on? It's a symptom of you not being clear in your communication. Practice being more, and I suggest that you go look at the book, the Business Analysis Practice Guide. and read through, I think it's section 4.11 on writing requirements. And then unambiguous. So look at this example, just to make sure that so we're clear with regard to what unambiguous means, because I'm practicing clear communication, because I could throw out the word unambiguous and half of you may or may not know what it exactly means and how do you apply it. That's what I said when I read it. I said, it's a great term, but what does it mean, right? Let me show an example. So it says the ambiguous requirement would say the system shall check the name field to be only alphabetic and the address field to be either alphabetic or numeric, but contain only addresses in the US or Canada, and the quantity field to be only numeric. All right, that's a little confusing. How do you sort through that? But if you look at the unambiguous requirement, it's very specific, very concise. The system shall validate. The name field is alphabetic. The address field is either alphabetic or numeric. All addresses are in the US or Canada only, and the quantity field is numeric only. So in this example, you can see where there's some precision, there's consistency in how it's written. The name field is, the address field is, all addresses are. There's consistency. Can we measure it? Now, completeness is a whole nother question. So you take something that's very vague and you make it very specific. And I, challenge all of you to get away from the romance novelist, emails and get very clear, very specific. Have your friends check your writing. Ask them if it makes sense. Don't have them just say yes or no. Have them repeat back and say, well, I think you mean this. If they don't get it, then there's practice, there's things we have to do. So you have to be able to manage well with your multiple projects, you have to make sure you're being consistent. If you're not, you're going to read emails 3 months from now, and you're not going to remember or understand anything in that email. It won't make any sense to you. Are you giving the most important initiatives every opportunity to succeed? Are you really focused on making sure that you have a clear communication? Because the unclear communication is just going to add cost, it's going to add inefficiency, it's going to add frustration. There's statistics out there that say miscommunication costs the US like $38 billion a year. It's a lot of money. So as a PM or business analyst or a leader in an organization, you have to make sure that you're addressing the right kind of communication. How do I ensure that people really understand? And don't think you're a great communicator. The test of great communication is when you can close out those issues really fast. One round. You address it, and the person on the other side understands it and either agrees or disagrees. So one other thing that we want to make sure we're tackling, got 2 more topics to hit here, is managing expectations. So we've got 10 projects going on. We've got various interruptions happening all the time. We're trying to prioritize things well. But you know what? Scope creep happens. And the way we manage scope creep is by making sure we're managing expectations. And that brings into a lot of the active listening. It brings in the concepts of prioritization. It brings in the concepts of clear communication. Do we have a charter? And is that charter clearly documented? Do we have objectives for these projects? And are they measurable? Do we know what it is when we get to the end? Do we understand what success looks like? I was just looking at some results of a meeting from another company and their executive meeting, and they said, oh, we had this great executive meeting and we came out with all these ideas and here's some of the highlights of it. And I said, that sounds okay. So initially I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention. I wasn't doing real active listening at that one. But I was thinking about it afterwards. I said, none of the things that they listed as the outcome are really measurable. I said, that's a problem. Because if you're talking about initiatives for an organization, how do you know when you've achieved it? So take that from an organizational level and also at your project level. You want to know when you've achieved it. And if you can't clearly articulate that and make it measurable, then you're potentially at risk for having scope creep. Repetition, explaining why, similar to what I was saying earlier, that one lady, she was asking me a bunch of questions as to why we changed the process. I mean, you got to be patient, people. You know, people are going to have questions. You got to put it in terms that they understand. You might have to explain it 15 different ways to get them to understand, but have patience. Now, I'm not very patient on some things, which is like customer service phone calls. But when it comes to managing projects and getting people aligned and tracking in the best way possible to ensure success of that project, I'm pretty darn good at it because I have patience there. So that whole situation I was telling you about with regard to the quality assurance group, I said, I'm prepping myself to have a whole lot of patience. And I'm starting to think through ways of how can I ensure that they are successful? Because I don't want them going down a path where they're going to bring up issues that are not important and not urgent. Because that's what I've seen happen before when you have these independent agencies doing quality assurance. You know, their level of success is how many things have I found? Well, I don't want them to find the things that are not important and not urgent. I want them to find the things that are important and urgent, or the important and not urgent. You know, those are the things I want them to find. So how do I take all of this and prep myself and prep them to have the most successful implementation we can possibly have? So I'm expecting to have to repeat myself a lot. I'm going to have to explain myself why many, many, many times. I'm going to have to make sure my team is patient as well. And I'm going to strategize on every single communication. And what I mean by that is, what do I want to get out of it? What do I want the meeting to get? What do I want out of that meeting? And then how am I going to get that out of that meeting? So every communication you have, you've got to be thinking about the objectives of the project, the scope of the project. How do you make sure that people understand? And then getting the answer that you're wanting to get out of it. Now, that doesn't mean that I get my way all the time. Sometimes the answer that I want to get out is 5 people to make a decision on how they are going to implement something. I'm not the one telling them how to implement it. That's not my role. But sometimes the goal of the meeting is, we are not leaving this call until we all agree on an approach. So my job is not just to sit there and take notes. My job is to make sure that all the important people are getting and moving forward towards an agreement. That's good facilitation skills. Many times I see project managers on phone calls with clients and they're not participating at all. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. Now, you don't need to be talking the whole time. That's definitely not something. But every meeting you facilitate, you have to have a goal and closing out whatever that goal is. And your job is to facilitate that meeting so that that goal is reached in that meeting. Now, there are going to be times when it's obvious that it's not going to be met. But then what are the action items to get there? So your job is to constantly be thinking about how we move this ball forward. How do we make sure that we're managing those expectations? How are we getting people to deliver on the objectives and keeping everything very, very focused on those objectives? So some of the questions that you guys asked is a couple weeks ago was, we practice these concepts, but what happens when others do not? And, you know, I think the best way to kind of approach that is lead by example. Lead by example practice them yourself. Find your own anecdotes that you know that have worked, and then start sharing them with others, just like I'm doing with you. And I've been in this business for 30-something years. I got all kinds of stories, good and bad. You know, I've got stories, and you know, and I'm always reflecting on what could I have done better, or hey, you know what, that worked out pretty well. I'm going to remember that and kind of, you know, use that again. I know that not everything works every single time, but you've got to constantly be practicing, constantly be honing your skills on how you deliver on successful projects. And I'm not talking about micromanaging, guys. I refuse to micromanage. I am totally a believer in, if I take the time to ensure that you understand your role, how it fits into this project, how important this project is, how it relates to other projects in this organization, even if you're working on 15 different projects, the more I can help you succeed. I'm not micromanaging. Micromanaging is looking at every single, well, why did you work on this yesterday? And you need to be doing this today, and I want you to finish these 5 things today. That's micromanaging. I don't go there. I said, I'm a firm believer that you're a smart person, and you're in this job. My job is to coach you and to help you understand how to be effective. And that's where, you know, we have to lead by example. And one of the other questions that came up was, how can you refocus your direct manager when they try to increase scope? You know, same thing. It's about being direct. It's about being, you know, clearly communicating to the management team that when you do this, this is the impact of it. You know, if you want to, you know, if you want to change that process, that's the 50-hour project, you might have an unintended consequence of unhappy clients. Is that what we want? You know, so you just have to, and I look at it from the perspective that you always have to be willing to communicate the ROI. Now, I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. And somebody can push back on me and say, oh, I disagree with you, Diane. You know, that's not what we should be doing. And I'm like, okay, well, then let's have a conversation. Help me understand. Help me understand how we can be better at this and how changing that process is going to impact this company in a positive way. And that the cost of changing it is not going to impact the customer happiness. So again, open to it, but I'm willing to communicate out and understand, clearly articulate why I believe we should go down a path or we shouldn't go down a path. The last topic, and I've got a few more minutes here, Project Insight is a great tool, guys, and I encourage you to use it. I've been using it. I love the features in it that allow us to see projects across all, you know, resourcing across all projects. You know, it's with managing multiple projects, trying to do it in Excel spreadsheet or even SharePoint, or, you know, it is hard because you're never going to have the latest and greatest status all the time. My attitude toward a tool like Project Insight is you get your project managers putting their schedules together. Their job is to manage their schedules. They should be detailed schedules. They should have their deliverables. They should break down those deliverables into the specific tasks. They should have people assigned to those things. They should be updating it as things change. They should have their critical path defined. You know, that's what you want them to do. And then the tool should be able to dissect that data. Project managers are in one place, and we pull a lot of data out of it. So the only way I know how to truly manage it from an executive standpoint is having a tool like a Project Insight that allows you to look across the organization on the activity in the organization. So in final review is that, you know, we really want to make sure you know the priorities in your organization. So critical. You cannot manage multiple projects without that. We need to know how your project fits in. I want you to focus on your own personal efficiency first. Once you learn things on how to be more efficient, especially, every organization is different. What works for me where I'm doing work may not work for you in yours. So it is really, you got to test things. You got to try things. You got to, see what works. And there's different personalities. So, so constantly look at your own, and then you can help make recommendations to others when they're fumbling. Help your team successfully prioritize. That's where you can help. If they don't understand what things to work on first, then you can certainly help. If you know the organizational priorities, if you know how all the projects fit in, you can certainly help people at least be able to deliver in a timely manner and not have that stress on their plate. Nothing more frustrating than delivering something and find out that you didn't have to get it done for 2 weeks and you could have been working on something else that's due tomorrow now. And now you have to work all night to get it done. That's very frustrating. I don't like working in those kinds of environments. And then finally, be willing to quantify the impact of not prioritizing. Be ready to do an ROI. Simple math problem. What's the cost of it today? What's the cost of it tomorrow? And how long is it going to take us to get there? What's the cost of getting there? Simple math problem. If it's going to cost me $200,000 to see a $50,000 annual reduction in cost, I got a 4-year return on investment. Probably not what you want. But learn return on investment formulas and use it, because that's the way that you help minimize those interruptions and those not important and urgent items from coming up. So you can stay focused on the things that are important and not urgent. And once in a while, stay focused on the things that are important and urgent. So I want to thank you guys for participating today. And it is Thanksgiving. I've got a couple more hours here, and then I'm going to enjoy my evening. I'm going to a hockey game tonight. So you guys have a wonderful afternoon. I'm going to hand it back to Alexa to finish up.
Hey, Diane. Thank you so much. So we do have one question. Someone asked, can you please give the name of the book that you recommend?
It is the Business Analysis for Practitioners, a Practice Guide. It's a PMI, Project Management Institute published book, and it is the base framework for the PMI PBA certification.
Awesome. Well, we'd like to thank you again, Diane. And for those of you still here, we have just a few more slides. For those of you on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @ProjectInsight, and you can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for the latest in PI and project management news. And in our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded videos for you to watch and learn from. So just a quick reminder that this is our final webinar of 2017. So we'd like to give a big thanks to Diane for sharing her time and knowledge with all of us. And that's all we have for you today. We hope everyone has a happy holiday, and we'll see you all in 2018. Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year, everybody. Thanks so much, Alexa.
All right.